he's going to actually use his own profile as an example to talk about what you do in your networking and what you communicate. So I'm going to kind of filter more people in as they come. So
Great.
I'll leave it over to Michael Argast.
Thank you.
Please come join.
All right, so I'm guessing by looking around the room, students? All right, almost everybody's a student? Great. All right, so I did a LinkedIn post about a week ago inviting people to the session, and I talked about networking as a superpower, right? And it's like, when superpowers come to mind, what do you think? Ability to leap tall buildings, move faster than super strength, right? Some of my favorite superheroes are not the Flash and Superman. Superman's he's kind of a boring superhero. He's invulnerable, basically, right? But people like Batman, right? People like Tony Stark, right? Like these guys aren't born superheroes. They make themselves superheroes through inventive powers. And so when I think about networking, I think about it as a creative power that you can use to improve your lives and the lives of those around you. And I'm going to get into how that works and why that works over this presentation. So, out of curiosity, why network? Why do you want to learn about networking? Let's start with that. Anybody? Go ahead.
I've heard from everybody that it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Okay. That's like one of those, unshakable truths. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And certainly when you're looking for jobs, that's certainly a big element of it. But is there more to it than just looking for jobs in your mind, or is it pretty much about getting that first job?
It's also about knowing that you can help you out as well, just in case you come across a problem that you can't solve.
Give me an example of that.
Say you come across a bug in the code that is specifically related to a piece of closed source software you can't access.
Yep.
So you would have to go to the QA department of the closed source software people and get their information and try and figure out how to get access to it through official channels. But if you know somebody who works for the company, you can talk to them and get on the fast track to solving this problem.
So shortcutting, and I mean, how many of you watched the Kevin Mitnick presentation today where he was talking about like how he was making phone calls out of solitary confinement? Like that's almost like a superpower, right? Like being able to do something that people don't think you should be able to do. So you're trying to solve a code problem, and you're getting access to the code, that people aren't supposed to have access to, right? That's solving a problem that is, almost a superpower in a way. Other examples of what you might use networking for? Anyone?
Share experiences.
Share experiences? Ideas, right? How do I solve this problem? Like finding a mentor, maybe, right? That's a good one. I'm guessing most of you are students on a technical track, so you're probably not thinking sales, right? But like networking and sales is kind of like their, bread and wine kind of thing. Like they go together very well. I personally use networking for a lot of different things, and I'll go into some of those examples. But examples include things like, if I want to learn a new trade or a new skill set, right? Well, how do I know where the best place to go and spend my time and learn that is, right? I can go online and figure out which of the 4,300 different Coursera courses I want to take, or which of those MIT classes, or I can talk to somebody who's an expert in the field and get them to give me targeted advice, and that can shortcut my learning process dramatically, right? And I'll give some examples of that. Any other thoughts in terms of what you can use networking for? I got my cheat list here, so no. All right. Well, let me tell you some stories about how I've used networking. So, in my career, I have used networking to land my last 4 jobs. Or interestingly, not some of my earliest jobs. So, it was a power that I developed later in my career, I would say. But my last job, other than the Alliance that I run, I decided that it was time for me to move on from Sophos, where I'd been running the sales engineering organization worldwide. And I wanted to look for something local because I was traveling too much. And I was like, well, who are the good local employers? And TELUS was one of them for my shortlist. So I reached out to my network, to a buddy of mine who was working at TELUS. And I'm like, I don't know if you guys are likely to have anything. And literally, I sit down with him for lunch a week later. He's like, this director opening just opened up, right? It hasn't even been posted yet, right? I think you're the perfect guy for the job. Are you interested in applying? Right? Like, that's how this skill works. And like, from being on my short list to being interviewed and having a job offer in my hand was 3 weeks, right? And so, it's an incredibly powerful tool, obviously, for job searching. But some other examples, my alliance, I started a year ago today, and it's an alliance of independent security consultants, and I've built that effectively through networking. So I launched with 40 members. We're up to over 200 members today. It's growing into a business that's bringing in revenues and doing services for customers and all this kind of stuff. And fundamentally, that was grown and built through networking and leveraging the power of other people's networks as well, right? So it's not just your network, because right now your networks are probably pretty small, but going beyond that. As a hiring manager, so I've employed hundreds of people over my career, and I can tell you, as somebody who has to hire people, being able to use your network effectively to find the right candidate and entice them into your organization is an incredibly powerful asset, because fundamentally as a manager, as a leader, you're measured on results, and having an empty seat does not get you to results. And so your ability to quickly fill those positions is an incredible skill as well. And one of the things that you learn over the years as a manager is you're always looking for new candidates, even if you don't have a job opening today. And the reverse applies to you as students and people who are out there looking for work. It's like, I may not be looking for a job today because I still have another 6 or 12 or 24 months of my program. But building my network today will put me in the mind of the person who will have the job for me 2 years from now. So those are things to think about as well. Support on engagements. You mentioned the coding example. I do a lot of consulting and advisory engagements for clients. And very often, I go to others in order to find recommendations or advice on how to solve a customer problem, right? So your code example is an example of that, but it's like, for example, right now I'm doing an engagement for a financial firm where it's like, they're looking for a Canadian-hosted storage provider because they want to stop emailing financial documents to their customers. And I reached out to my network and said, what do you recommend, right? So that allows me to build my short list without having to do all that research myself, and also get a short list recommended by other experts in the field, which adds additional weight to things. When 12 people say, this is something you should check out, that adds additional credibility and weight to that particular solution. I've used it to close literally millions of dollars in business, which is obviously, as I mentioned, from sales is a powerful tool. And then earlier this year, I used it to build my book and reading list for the year, which is like just a crazy off the wall thing. But like, how do you decide where you want to do research and learn? I decided there were like 4 specific areas that I wanted to read this year because I read a lot of books. And I reached out to my network for advice and recommendations. And based on the people who were responding, that let me put weight on what would be really cool and interesting books to read. So it's not just about finding a job. There's a lot of different things you can use networking for. And that's something that I really wanted to kind of impress on you. But one of the things that I want you to think about when it comes time to go out and build that network is I want you to think about what you are and what you stand for and what your brand is. Because fundamentally when you connect with people, you're trying to leave an impression as well as gather and exchange information. So at the end of the last session, I put out an offer, and I'm putting it out today. Like, if you're looking for a job upon graduation, if you're looking to get connected in the industry, reach out to me. I'm connected to pretty much every major security firm and hirer in town. And I love helping students get those first jobs. That to me is a fantastic way to get back. I'm not a headhunter, it's just something I do for fun. There's nothing better that delights me than helping people out at the start of their careers. I had a couple students at the end of the last session reach out to me, but they kind of came at me in this aimless way, right? It's like they sat down, they had coffee, they didn't tell me a story, they didn't have anything to share, they didn't really know what they were looking for. And so when it came time to help them, I was kind of left holding an empty bag, right? And so a few things to think about as it relates to networking specifically is understand, A, what is it that you want to leave an impression? What's your brand say about you? Like, am I professional? Am I relaxed? Am I a fun-loving guy? Do I love code a lot? What am I passionate about? What excites me, right? And, the person on the other end of that conversation should be able to remember a few key things about you. And you should know what those things are going to be before you go into the session, before you spend the time with them. That way you're going to be much more likely to have a successful, somebody's going to latch onto something. So another person who reached out to me, sat down with me, He was talking to me about this new CTO job that he was considering. I mentioned that I knew somebody who worked in the same industry. He took on the CTO job, found a total disaster that he walked into. I connected him with my colleague, and he went in and helped clean up that disaster and saved that company millions of dollars in infrastructure and hardware costs and all this kind of stuff. And so, because he had left an impression on me and had come to me with some specific asks and knew what he was looking for, I was able to connect and make the connection work. And so, when you're reaching out to people, think not only about your brand, but also what are the specific actionable asks that I can give somebody. I mean, how often do you sit down with somebody and say, I need help? Help is vague, right? Like, what do you want? I want to be introduced to the person who wrote the source code for that app, right? Because that's going to allow me to solve my problem. Or, you know, I need to know who's hiring in town, right? Or, you know, this is my background. What sort of jobs do you think would be interesting to somebody like myself, right? But knows very specifically what you're looking for. That's going to make a huge difference on having a successful session rather than something that just kind of, you know, burns away into nothing. So, a couple things there. The other thing that I like to talk about is when you're reaching out to people, try not to make it purely a self-serving exercise, right? I mean, everybody would love to sit down with Elon Musk and pick his brain, but what's Elon going to get out of it, right? What's the value that you're bringing to the equation? And you know, you may think that as students, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't have my own network. I don't have something that I can bring. But maybe it's that passion and energy you have for a specific area of technology. I mean, those of us in industry, you know, we went to school years ago and learned things that are way out of date. And so maybe you're bringing us some new ideas or some novel things that you just learned in class, right? But think about how you can be giving as well as receiving. And that's going to make it much more likely that that person is going to want to return and engage with you again and again. And that's where the real value is going to come. So what do you stand for? What's your mission? Most people do networking wrong. It's a bit of a spray and pray. There's a few ways to do it right. So one of them is think about who you spend the most time with and who is in your circle. How many of you have heard of Dunbar's Law? You may have heard of the fact that most groups and societies in culture typically reach a maximum size of about 150 people. Dunbar's Law, it's called. And that's because we can only keep so many relationships in our mind, right? And when you get beyond that, things tend to kind of water down. And, you know, I myself, I like to argue that I have a form of face blindness. It's really name blindness, right? Like I'll meet somebody, and after 6 or 7 times, I'll remember their name. But before that, I really struggle with it. My wife, on the other hand, is like, you know, she'll meet somebody once, and 3 years later, she'll run across them and she'll remember their name. And I'll be able to tell you all about them, right? You know, what their favorite color is, and you know, all this stuff. I can remember their story, but their names I just suck at. So when you get beyond that kind of core group of people, it gets watered down quite aggressively. And so then that becomes a question of, well, who do I want in that core group? And one of the things that I always argue for is an idea of diversity. And so many students in the room probably haven't been through layoffs and all this kind of stuff. But you know, one of the things that organizations, a lot of people struggle with is they get sucked into an organization and they work in that organization for years, and then everybody they know is in that circle in that organization. So when it comes time that they get laid off, or you know, it's time for them to look for another job, their circle is very, very small, right? And so diversity in your network can be an incredibly powerful tool for reaching beyond your circle. And so thinking about, you know, how can I connect into other networks rather than just the people that I work with or the people that I socialize with. Another aspect of Dunbar's Law, one of my favorite quotes, I don't know who it originated from, but the person I hear from the most is Tim Ferriss, who has a fantastic podcast. He talks about you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? Have any of you heard that quote before? Right? I really like this, right? Like, if you hang out with people that spend all their time at fast food restaurants and eat lots of junk food, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time at fast food restaurants eating a lot of junk food, right? If you hang out with a bunch of snowboarders who like to play on the mountain all the time, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time snowboarding and playing on the mountain all the time, right? Like this is just, it's kind of obvious personality stuff. And so thinking very consciously about the people, especially at the core of your network, and do they model the types of behaviors and interactions that you want to see in your life, right? So are they active? Are they positive? Are they outgoing? Are they, are they ones to boost you rather than tear you down, right? Think about that core circle of 5, because those are the people that are going to have the biggest impression on you in your life and where you go from there. And that also is really important from a networking perspective as well. So doing it right in a little bit more detail. So I love social media just because it is a powerful way to keep your network warm. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people that you will not naturally interact with on a regular basis, right? They're not part of your daily call list. They're not people that you talk to. They're not people you run into. But social networks, because of the way they work, is like your LinkedIn feed or your Twitter feed. If other people are using those networks, they're seeing and hearing from you. Facebook, the same idea. And it just helps to keep you top of mind. So those rare occasions when you do run into them or reach out to them, they haven't forgotten about you. You weren't somebody that they just heard about once or talked to once 3 years ago, and then you've fallen out of view. So going back to your core network, one of the things that you want to think about is rhythm and frequency, right? So if somebody is, for example, offered to take you on as a mentor, right? And you sit down with them once, and then you never sit down with them again, that's not a valuable experience for either, right? Mentorship doesn't work that way. Mentorship works with some degree of regularity and frequency and action and follow-up, right? So when you think about your core network and the people that you're trying to interact with, think about a rhythm and frequency that makes sense, right? So if you're reaching out to somebody and you want that person to help you find a job, reaching out to them once and then never again is probably not going to be an effective strategy, right? Having some sort of regular connection is going to be much more effective, right? And deciding within that broader network of 150 people, well, how often do I want to interact with those people? And I'll give you a personal example. One of the most influential members of my career, Joanne's new boss, Steve Munford, is somebody that I worked with at Sophos. He was the CEO of Active State, became eventually the CEO of Sophos, convinced me to move to the UK with my young family, had a great experience, learned a lot from him. And just casually over the years, we've managed to stay in touch, right? So it's been one of those, I reach out, he reaches out. It's not anything too stressful. We recognize that, we're both busy. He travels a lot for his work, but we managed to get together at least 2 or 3 times a year. And inevitably, when I left Sophos and went to work for TELUS, every 6 months or so, he'd say, "Are you ready to leave TELUS yet? Are you ready to leave TELUS yet? Are you ready to leave TELUS yet?" Because he sits on the board of a bunch of other companies, and he's always looking for good people he's worked with to help place in places and stuff like this. And eventually, when I retired out of TELUS, I said, "Well, I'm not looking for full-time work." And he's like, "Well, what are you looking for?" Right? And I told him about the sort of things I was looking for. And within months, Steve had landed me 3 or 4 gigs. I'll tell you, there's nothing better than having a colleague and a mentor who sits on the board to recommend you a gig inside a company, right? When a board member says, "You should work with this guy," it's basically a contract writing agreement kind of thing. So again, I'm not going to call Steve every day, right? Because he's a busy guy, right? But we have a good enough relationship that we're going to stay in touch on a somewhat regular basis, just to kind of keep the relationship warm. And he's going to give me an update, and I'm going to give him an update, and we'll talk about some personal stuff, but not too much. And it's a good kind of regular frequency. So thinking about your contacts and your network, what's the right frequency for each of these individuals, and how are you going to maintain that over time? Because if you let it go for 5 years, right, nothing's going to ever come of it. But if you have a frequency that's somewhat regular, like a friendship or any other relationship, then you're both going to invest in it over time. And when somebody picks up the phone and says, "Hey, I need help," or "I need assistance or guidance," they're much more likely to say yes than if they haven't heard from you at all. So those are a lot of my key things. The other thing that I want you to think about is something I call the law of attraction. Actually, it's not my thing, which is, there's this kind of, people who've read the book The Secret and stuff like this, there's this idea that, synchronicities happen, and really it's what you put out into the world tends to bring things back to you. And it's not magic or voodoo. It's when you're talking to your network and you're saying, I'm looking for this. People talk to each other and they share those things with each other, and that's what actually causes the synchronicity to happen. It's not like magic stuff is just appearing up out of nowhere. It's that conversation that you have and the impression that you leave, right? So if you're the two students whose names I can't even remember from last year, who don't make an impression and don't follow up, I'm not going to be talking about them other than these vague, non-name referencing terms, right? But Nick, who I worked with on that project, that we helped, clean up his IT infrastructure, I can tell you all sorts of things about the guy. And I can tell you what he's thinking about right now because he's talked to me and left an impression and left details. And so when you're talking to people, you're putting your ideas and your requests out into the world. They have a way of coming back. Yeah, that's it. So, questions? Yes?
What would you suggest would be a good way to reach out to someone when, someone that you kind of already know, say like a coworker after you left the company or something, without necessarily, without actually needing help?
Mm-hmm.
Is it weird sometimes sending, a message on LinkedIn just being like, hi, how's your life? Is that something people do, or what would be a good way of reaching out without having to be like, hey, I have this issue, can you help me with it?
Right, the question is more almost like, does there need to be a specific ask in order to justify getting together? And so, if you had a reasonably good working relationship before you parted ways organizationally, then there's no reason not to, right? I'm an introvert, actually, by nature. I force myself up on the stage and stuff like that. But so we feel it's a bit socially awkward to extend ourselves to ask other people. One of the really interesting things about human psychology is if you want somebody to give you favors in the future, ask them for a favor today. Once somebody starts doing you favors, they tend to keep doing favors for you, right? It's just a weird thing about human psychology. Not everybody's like that, but most people are like that. So reach out. Maybe they were thinking about you, maybe they weren't. Have a random thing to talk about, right? It shouldn't be completely blank. But yeah, it's. I do it all the time with people where I just want to stay in touch, right? I have no objective going into it. I will say, however, typically when I go to sit down with somebody, I will have 3 or 4 kind of talking points written down in my mind or on a piece of paper so that I have a place to start. But the other thing that I will always do is I will leave the opportunity for spontaneity, because the magic comes when you have a discovery in a conversation that neither of you were expecting.
Yes.
Okay. Good question. Yep.
Sort of relates to that question, but you said you use social networks to keep relationships warm, right?
Yeah.
How would you use social networking for that?
So there's a variety of things. People like personal connections. So they like seeing what you're up to. For example, my LinkedIn network, I get more views and likes when I'm traveling and I'm posting pictures of travel because people really like to see where people are going for some reason. It's just photos make a huge difference, and people just relate to that. Here's an interesting book I've read, or something to share, or people, and that way the next time you connect with someone, they're more likely to have a basis for conversation and feel comfortable just kind of sitting down and, hey, so, how's your foot, right? In my case, I dropped a weight on my foot the other day, and people know about that, right? It breaks the ice in many ways. So I would suggest, however, be thoughtful about the brand that you're trying to build and portray over time, right? So I tend to be very professional or somewhat professional on my LinkedIn network. I only put certain types of things on my Facebook network, which I restrict the people that are on. Right? So be thoughtful about what type of information you're sharing in what places, and what type of brand image you're trying to present about yourself over time. Is it professional? Is it fun? Is it creative? Is it inventive? Right? Think about what it is that you're trying to portray, and then you'll find ways to do that. A couple shortcuts that I use in my industry. security, there's a ton of news going on. It's really, really hard to keep on top of everything. How many of you use RSS readers? It's like an old technology, right? Like Google Reader would
Technically, use it.
Yeah.
We really just follow the label, like a better website. We have RSS readers, but
Yeah.
they don't.
So I personally use RSS readers because most of the best content in the security industry comes from infrequent sites, infrequent posts, people that you're not going to go and browse to every day. Like Brian Krebs' website as an example, right? Like one of the best investigative security reporters out there. I'm not going to go visit his website every day, but it's going to be in my RSS feed, right? Bruce Schneier, a lot of others, right? So everything gets pushed to my phone in my RSS feed, right? I use Feedly, you can use other ones, right? And then like when I find something that I really like that I think is relevant to my network, it's one button to share it and add a comment, right? And again, like that's just, it's relevant to my network, it's relevant to my industry, it's quick and easy, I'm already keeping myself up to date. So it's seconds to, again, put something out there and just kind of keep the network warm.
And I might suggest that everybody likes to follow the LinkedIn, but it's a pain in the butt when you have, there's a lot of traffic, like I said, big pictures and everything else.
Yeah.
If you take a look, almost everybody that's on LinkedIn will also have a Twitter, and many people will cross-post.
Yeah.
So it's a lot simpler to make sure that anybody you follow on LinkedIn will take the time out to follow them on the Twitter. It's a lot simpler to read and find something that's interesting, like hey, we're hiring comes out for most of the guys in my industry. And those little short ones are probably some of the things you're really interested in.
Yeah, in security specifically, security is a very Twitter-heavy social network compared to LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn just because I got into it before I got into Twitter, and it just seems to be a little bit more broad in my network. But I use both, right? And like following people on Twitter, people share different stuff to different networks, and like some of your contacts will not share anything to LinkedIn. I would say there's a good 25% of my security contacts who literally don't have LinkedIn profiles because they're a bit privacy paranoid and stuff like that. But they have Twitter profiles, which is kind of like, contradictory, but it's you know what you're sharing and it's public and it's kind of an understood platform that way. So I agree. I think Twitter is a great solution. And also it's Twitter is much better for engaging with people, right? Like having a two-way conversation because it's more natural to medium in some ways. Other questions? All right, go ahead.
Any advice for first contact? Say you picked up somebody's business card, you want to send them an email, but you haven't actually had that much of a conversation.
Well, reference the first meeting, and especially if somebody's offered to connect, and just say, hey, just be upfront and explicit about what you're trying to get out of it, right? Because most people, especially those of us who have been in the industry for a while, are looking for ways to help students, right? Like, if you talk to myself, to Joanne, to Gary Perkins, to any of the leaders in our industry, like there is a dearth of information security talent and capacity, and so we are hungry to bring more people into the industry. And so we're gonna look for ways to help. And if it's not us, we might suggest someone as well, right? So don't cut off all avenues if they don't
We've
give you
been
direct
around
advice.
for a while, so we have pretty deep networks ourselves.
Yeah, that's one of the things I always say.
Even if we're not looking for somebody,
We know people who are.
99% we know who is.
Yes, yeah, and that's one of my favorite things to do. I mentioned earlier is like help students find their first gigs or help new immigrants to the country find their first gigs and stuff like that. So, yes.
One thing that really bothers me is a lot of time a lot of people say, hey, are you hiring? And I'll say, here's my card and contact us. The thing is that they won't contact the next day. They wait 2 months and then say, hey, remember when?
Yeah.
If you get a contact from anybody who's in the know, don't think that they're too busy or anything else. Right away, get it into their inbox. As soon as you get home, send that, hey, thanks for connecting today. I'll talk to you more, later on when I'm ready, but send that first contact right away.
Yep.
I won't remember you in a week.
Yeah. The other thing, this kind of goes back to old school good habits is like a thank you follow up as well, right? It goes miles, right? Like somebody sat down with me and they had a meeting, and then like nothing, right? Like no, hey, it was great to meet you. Here's something that we talked about that might be interesting, or like just take the time to take 2 minutes to do a follow up, and it's going to reinforce the stickiness of that connection.
What I've heard a lot is like what you learn in school is not even closely related to what you actually do at work. So let's say, for instance, you were to hire me. What would you look for? Would you want me to have more technical skills or like basic skills like communication and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the role. I mean, cybersecurity is a huge industry. I started off in technical and operational type roles, coding, and ended up in more sales, marketing, business development, strategy kind of stuff. So, I mean, if you're applying for a malware researcher role, they're probably going to want you to know how to do code analysis, right? If you're applying for a sales or business development role, they're going to look at your personality, right? I personally, especially when I'm hiring junior intermediate roles, I look for two things, attitude and aptitude, right? So attitude, do they bring enthusiasm to the job, right? Are they excited, right? Like if somebody comes to an interview or a meeting and they act bored half the time, they're checking their phone, I'm probably not going to be interested in following up because they're not really engaged, right? If somebody brings their A game and is fully engaged and has done some research beforehand and has the right things to talk about, great, right? I mean, if you're interviewing for the first time, have questions for the employer. They love that, right? It shows that you're interested and that you're excited about the job. And aptitude, well, depending on the role, I'm looking for somebody I like to say is tall enough to ride the bus, right? Like, it doesn't need to be the specific skill area in a lot of cases, but I need to have them demonstrate a depth of ability in some area that they're already interested in, so that I know that they're going to be able to learn and ramp up and be along for the ride. So I have this technique where I will pick an area that they have claimed to be an expert on in their resume, and that I'm reasonably comfortable with, and I'll dive deep just on that one area to get a sense of, when you call yourself an expert, what does that mean, right? And so think about those two things primarily, but everybody hires differently. One of the things that I would also recommend is just being able to tell specific, relatable stories to the skill in question, right? So it's not enough to say, I know how to program in C++. I've done this type of project and this sort of work, and make it real and relatable in a story. Great questions. Others?
Yeah.
All right. You have 8 minutes until our next panel. Thank you, everyone, for coming along today. If you're a student and looking for a job, or planning to look for a job, feel free to connect with me, and I will do everything I can to help you out. So thanks for coming.
So you have business cards.
So
you have a business card.
Of course.